So my name is Mindy Spencer. I'm an assistant professor in health promotion, education, and behavior, and I have a joint appointment at the Institute for Southern Studies. So the course that I was teaching is called Health Problems in a Changing Society. First time I taught it, I had 36 students. I thought it went very well. We had great conversations. The students felt confident. They felt comfortable with one another. And then when fall rolled around, the class enrollment had increased to 88. And I was thinking, how can I preserve the things that I loved the most about this class, which included in-class presentations and that kind of feeling of safe space for the students to talk about some of these controversial issues. How do I do that with such a large class? Now, my story is a little bit different because instead of having one classroom that expanded, because the enrollment was so unexpected, we actually ended up having to break it into two concurrent sections. So I had a doctoral student who I was able to supervise who covered the other class literally right across the hall from me. So both of our classes had about 44 students in each class. And I want to show you some of the things that I did for the purpose of this grant. I think the reason why I'm going first is because my initial grant was actually the least innovative of all of them, so the most basic, and when you go with the most basic, you tend to have the most success, right? So I didn't try anything that was too crazy. In my initial grant, I said that I just wanted to become proficient in Blackboard, everything Blackboard. And fortunately, I had very, very good people, including Mitchell West, who helped me out with that.
Raise your hand, Mitchell. Yay.
So very quickly, I want to show you my Blackboard design. So much of it is just a matter of design. It ended up being a lot of work on the front end, setting this Blackboard site up. So this is where I introduced my class, just very quickly. That's me, right here. That's my doctoral student, Kim Butler, who was outstanding, and she covered section 2 for the class. The required text, and a lot of this, I mean, it really is just design, but it makes a huge difference for the students. So once I got through this, and I'm feeling like, okay, so I've got Blackboard pretty much down. I've got all the content, because I think for most of us, Blackboard has just been kind of a warehouse, a place to store our information for the course. So here's another example of just what one of our typical days looked like, where we saw part of a PBS documentary. So it did end up being a lot of work on the front end. So upon day one, we ended up having to spend a lot of time just maneuvering through the Blackboard site. Something else that I did with the students was both myself and Ms. Butler handed out playing cards, okay, poker cards. Handed them out to the students, and the students recorded, say, if they were I don't know, an ace of spades or a 2 of hearts. So then they had this anonymous indicator that they carried with them for the remainder of the semester. In terms of how we were able to get the sections to interact physically, there were 3 days that we had debates. So we would have the reds from my class go to her class, the reds from her class go to my class, and we would have debates. That's a way that they were able to interact with each other by section. But what I decided pretty early on is that I needed to do more for the purpose of technology in order to kind of step up this grant. And I did that through the online forums. The online forums gave the students an opportunity to interact with not only each other within the section, but with students from the other section. The way that they did that was they did not know who else was in their particular chat room. One of the things I had to do, because technology tends to fail and students can come up with a lot of reasons why they weren't able to log on, why they weren't able to do something. So I went through and I found these images that show the different errors that they could come up with. I put all of the responsibility on the student that for our online forum days, technology failing was not going to be an option. This was worth a big part of their grade, and if they weren't there, they weren't there. So I showed them the different error messages they might receive. For our first online discussion, so these were actually class days. This was during class time. This is all the students had to do. They had to get this far. They knew, say for example, if they had a 3 of hearts, that they were in group 3.
Yeah.
They knew to just say no when they got to that. And then they would put in an alias that only I knew. So that way I was able to keep track of who was in there. And they were directed to an online chat using Adobe Acrobat Connect Pro. Oh, and I've shut down this meeting. So what we ended up having were 11 different chat rooms at one time. And I was so panicky the first time I tried this. I was sure the technology was going to fail. So I'm sitting in my office. I have 11 different windows open. The students log in. I had 100% participation across 3 different chat rooms, with the exception of 1 flat tire. Okay? So 88 students showed up for 3 different classes, all online across these 11 chat rooms. The chats were outstanding. They didn't know who was in their room. They didn't know who was in the other section. And they ended up being able to be very honest with each other about some pretty controversial things. At the end of each of the chats, I was able to email the transcript to myself, and that's how I was able to tell who was in, what they were saying, were they participating. And some of the conversations were fantastic. One of the other things that I did, so I've got a way for them to interact in these smaller sections, and just a few quick survey results. When I asked the students if they had too many online forums, 60 out of 70 disagreed or strongly disagreed. And I asked if they agreed that having the online forums was a nice alternative to a traditional lecture. 65 out of 69 agreed or strongly agreed. So overwhelmingly, the students liked this. Some of their comments were, it allowed us to express our opinions openly, and it was so much fun. It allowed quiet people to voice their opinions. I'm quiet in class, but using the online forum allowed me to get my opinion out there. It was a nice alternative to sitting in class. And it allowed a smaller group to discuss a topic and allowed us to remain private so our opinions were able to be spoken. And it's true, there were students I didn't hear a peep out of in class, and they really took on leadership roles within this online forum. So I think that part of it is the anonymity. I think that they like that. This is also their mode of communication. I mean, this is how they show themselves. This is their community. So I think that there really was an element of, I'd say, a generational discord. I had no idea they would be nearly as comfortable in this kind of a setting.
About 3 minutes, Mindy.
You got it. The other thing that I did, because I had these online, because I had in-person presentations in my initial class, which was much smaller, how was I going to do this with over 40 students? The final project for my class was a policy brief, just a 2-page policy brief that the students had the option to send either to a Congress member, or in this case, so this one went to Harris Pastides or Will. So this is an example of a policy brief that was developed by Mr. Johan Fredrickson. His 2-page policy brief, he designed this entire thing himself. Outstanding student. Here's another example, and the reason why I'm showing you these, this is from Miss Jada Bourne, is because I gave them the option, and they loved it, to do online presentations of their policy brief. Some of them did a traditional webcam, some of them did a traditional flip cam, but others used this.
Oh, what's up, my brother? Not much, man. What about you? Are you going out tonight? It's dollar beer night. Well, I am trying to go out, but I can't find a designated driver. I guess I could always just drive myself home from the bar after the night is over. Now, dude, don't drive yourself home. That's not safe. With the sweetener policy going into action, college students, like us, can show the bar their student voucher after they are done drinking. If they show them a voucher, then they can get a free ride home. It's really clever, man. You should check it out. Are you serious? Oh, heck yeah.
So there's one example of students who use the Extra Normal website as a way. They wrote the entire script, they direct the animation. So students who are shy about being on camera had an opportunity to do a presentation that was all their creative energy online. And I also want to show you this for about a minute. So this is the work of Mr. Johan Fredrickson, once again. Clearly an outlier. He's extremely brilliant when it comes to technology. But it provided us with an opportunity to see what he had to give us without eating up the last 2 months of class time with these presentations.
University of South Carolina is the first college to add a new test date tool to the VIP, enabling students to choose when to schedule their own tests.
Overall, I basic stuff which is available with help from our support staff to make it possible to retain some of these elements of smaller classrooms that I valued so much with a larger classroom size. And it also gave me the chance to allow classes from different sections to truly interact with one another and get to know one another. As far as lessons learned, don't be afraid of the technology. The one thing that kind of did go wrong is with these, a lot of students had anxiety, so it meant a lot of work with them at the tail end, preparing for the presentations. And then in addition, there were 2 students who the technology kind of failed, and I ended up having to change their grade because it turned out they did everything in their power to submit their project. It didn't go through. I calculated a grade, so I had to go back actually when they were able to show that they turned in their presentation under the wire, and so I had to change their grade. So some technology failing, but overall it was a fantastic experience.
So I'm Peter Duffy. I head up the MAT program in the theater department. So that's where I spend most of my time. So on the one hand, I'm teaching classes of 10 graduate students or so, and then I teach a Theater 200 class, theater appreciation class. Now I have 200 students. So going from it's a little schizophrenic, going from a nice table conversation, everybody participates. You know everybody's prepared. Otherwise, it's an awkward hour and 15 minutes or whatever, sweating it out, hoping I don't ask a question, to a completely anonymous sort of 200 student mass lecture. And so I'm really interested in conversation and how do we get students to talk in these huge lecture classes. Because when I first started teaching it, I had 87 students, and I would ask a question and there'd just be complete crickets. And so I'm trying to figure out, all right, how do I get students to feel comfortable to talk in class? And so that was one of the objectives. I had 2 basic objectives with this. The first one is find a way to engage more students in class discussion, and the other one was to make theater immediate and relevant through technology. And which is kind of weird because theater is an ephemeral art form. It's in front of you, it's here and it's gone. And once you include technology, then it's not quite theater anymore. So it's a weird conundrum. So I was trying to figure out how to make it matter. Is it an art form that only 6% of Americans go to the theater at least once a year? And so how do I convince students who that this is something that they should think about and care about and maybe consider going on a Friday night on their own volition? So the first thing I did was I got the grant was primarily for this resource called Poll Everywhere, and it's kind of like if you can think about American Idol, you can text in who you want to win. So it's expensive. It's about $2,000 for the subscription to have the number of students I have and to be able to poll the way I wanted to. So Poll Everywhere, you can do a variety. When you start, you have a screen that looks like this without any of these numbers, and then you ask your students to take out their cell phones, and they're like, "You want me to take out my cell phone?" And that's kind of a neat moment of kind of disequilibrium for them. And then you just ask them this question, So we were watching segments of a film version of the play The Piano Lesson. So, all right, we've talked a little bit about genre. What genre do you think it falls under so far of what we've seen? And so they can text in to the number. I cut out the numbers because it was just getting too big for the screenshot. But there's a number that you text into, and if you think it's a domestic drama, then you text this number. Clearly, it was a domestic drama, or I'm a terrible teacher. So they had an opportunity to just text in what they thought. And it starts, these bars start immediately, and they start zipping across the screen, and students are really kind of shocked and amazed by how immediate this technology can be. So it was really a neat way to engage the students, and they could see, okay, good, I'm on the right track. I thought it was a domestic drama. It is a domestic drama, so now I can talk about it. And instead of being the first kid who says, I think it's a tragic comedy, and it's like, no. Sorry, anybody else? So they know from the outset that okay, most people will agree with me, so I can talk about it. So it was a nice icebreaker to start students to have a larger conversation. If you have 150 or 250 students in the class, it's a little intimidating to be the person to raise your hand and give your opinion. So that's one type of question that you can ask. And then you can just survey the group. I wanted to know on the first day of class this semester, how many plays have you seen? You know, in your life, how many plays have you seen? So out of 200 students, there's only 3% of them haven't seen a play ever, which is really kind of gratifying if you care about the theater. And then we had a chance to see, okay, so there's the vast majority of you have seen between 1 and 7 plays. How many have you seen? What have you seen? Where was it? And so it's a lot easier to have that conversation because then now they can say, well, 71% are in the same group that I'm in. It's a little bit easier to have this conversation, to have this dialogue. And then they're just the theater nerds, you know, that are happy to talk about it. And then this was an interesting thing to do, and I've learned a lot about how to do this, and I'll explain what my mistakes and then and what I've since come to understand. They can text in questions, so I use this as a way to, before an exam. We had about 10 minutes or so before the end of the lecture, and I said, okay, I've set up a poll. I've set up a poll here, and you can just text in questions that you want to know about the exam. Here's your opportunity. Because so many times you say, all right, anybody have a question? And you're just looking at it. Okay, see you later. And so this was a really good way to get students to engage in the asking of questions. Of course, there are the Weisenheimers who say, can you tell us the answers? Like, please. There are some things like that, and there's a way that you can block responses. I didn't get my TA on it fast enough, so now we got the system down where we're all set up and they know how to block, and so it's a lot better. But the first day the first time I did it, I was like, oh, they're going to ask questions. These are thoughtful people. It was hysterical, but it was a complete waste of time. The questions were all appropriate, but they were not germane necessarily to the review of the exam. So it was good for camaraderie, but that was about it. So there are a couple of ways to use this poll anywhere data, and there are ways that you can capture the information. So if you're doing other kinds of surveys, you can capture that information, and you can have it organized in graphs and things for you. So there are a couple of other tools and benefits to it. I don't need that much, but it was a really good way to have the students engage in conversation, which was one of my goals. And the other thing I did was I got a nifty little video camera because I have my Mac, and holding the Mac up to a class of 200 people to have a Skype conversation with somebody is a little awkward. So I got a nicer little video camera to use so we can have a better teleconference with people. And these are the 3 people that we had teleconferences with. This is Tim Simons. If you guys have seen the Geico commercial with Abe Lincoln, he's Abe Lincoln. And he's been in a bunch of commercials, and he's now in an HBO show. And so he's actually a former student of mine, and so we're still very close. And we had a wonderful video conference with him, and the students were able to ask him questions and what's it like, because he was an actor in Chicago, and now he lives in LA, and so they were able to ask him really germane questions about how do you prepare for a role, and what's your life like day to day, and what do you do when you're not acting, and all those kinds of questions. This is Jeff Adelberg, who is a professional lighting designer in Boston, and he took us into a theater. He used his computer and just kind of used it as a video camera, and we were able to see what does the set design look like in a theater where he works, and what are the constraints and opportunities for him. And this is Abuela Makiba, who is just a phenomenal actress, and she has a one-woman show called Rage Is Not a One-Day Thing: The Untold History of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And it is a phenomenal piece of theater. And she does a lot of research, and then she kind of brings this research to life. So they were able to talk with her a little bit about how do you research a role, and how do you create roles from biography. And so there were some really interesting conversations, and it was a great way to engage the students in an art form that's so ephemeral. I think this is a good way to get students a little bit more hooked, to talk to people who are actually out doing the work, and I couldn't have done this without the grant. So how successful was it? I made the mistake of not making this a requirement. I didn't tie the answering the survey to their grade, which I should have done. So I only had about a third of the students respond. So these are the students that are really motivated by what we did. So these numbers are probably a little skewed. So I'm not saying that, you know, I'm a little dubious about all these responses. So these are just some of the questions I really wanted to know about. Am I interested in learning through the use of technology in the classroom? Overwhelmingly, everybody was either strongly agreed or agreed with that. When I initially reviewed the syllabus for the course, I was apprehensive because the amount of technology used in the course, and almost nobody would care about the amount of technology, was intimidated by it. And these are the questions I was really going after. So I was more likely to, in class, I was talking in class about a topic after I texted in a reply to the question. And that was something I really wanted to know. And the vast majority, of 89% of the students, agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. And I think that was something that was really useful to me to know. The use of technology in this course encouraged me to participate more in class. You know, again, the vast majority of students said yes. The use of technology in this course improved the learning environment. Overwhelmingly, people agreed with that statement. The use of technology in this course provided for better class discussion. The overwhelming majority agreed with that statement as well. So I think it was successful by and large. I was really pleased with the direction of it. There are a lot of bumps and hiccups that just figuring out the Poll Everywhere software and, you know, how am I going to pay for it next year, and there are all these things that kind of come up. But overall, I'm glad I'm doing it. I'm repeating it this semester. I think it's fairly successful, and I mean it bears out with what the students have said. If you have smaller classes, you can go to polleverywhere.com and it's free. But because of the number of students I have, they charge you per response, and so or per participant actually. And so because I would have so many participants.
I'm Allison Marsh. I'm an assistant professor, and I see the people over here, so I'm going to take stuff with me. I'm an assistant professor in the history department, where I am a historian of technology. And when I applied for the grant, I said, well, you know, technology is not necessarily digital, newfangled cell phone things. In fact, I'm teaching History 108, Science and Technology in World History, beginning of time to now, meaning giant, large introductory survey, mostly for non-majors, about the history of science, the history of technology. And so I applied for the grant, actually, for a Galileo scope. The Galileo scope was developed in 2009, International Astronomy Year, with the idea of really trying to teach more people about sort of, you know, basic astronomy. And what it is it's a rather inexpensive telescope that is set at the magnification power that Galileo used when he discovered the moons of Jupiter. And so what I wanted to do is I really wanted to get the students out and think about what are the challenges of the past? What were the technologies of the past? What are the challenges of data collection? What are the challenges of overthrowing an accepted ideology that say, hey, wait a minute, you know that moon that's perfect up there? Well, it's actually pitted. It has these craters. There are all these things, you know, that it's not a perfect heavenly sphere. And so with the grant, I purchased 48 Galileo scopes for my class of 100, meaning we were set into at least, well, I had 3 different groups. And I made them all go out and look at the moon for a week. So to pass them around, you can go. And the first thing everybody says, like, oh my god, that was really hard. I have comments like, do you know the moon isn't out all night? And I was like, so some of my results were, the moon does not cooperate. Yeah, you're right, it's hard. It's really rough being Galileo. But what I was really trying to do was to get students to actually think about technological change and think about what challenges people have and how it wasn't always as easy as we have it today. So what I wanted them to do is I made them all go out and look at the moon, and then I had them respond to perhaps a ridiculous hypothesis. I wanted them to argue that the moon was hollow. And they're like, the moon isn't hollow. And I was like, yeah, you know what? And a couple hundred years ago, we didn't think that the Earth rotated the sun. So go ahead, figure out how you need to argue this. The goal of the assignment was to think about what is the most persuasive form of disseminating your information to get to a 21st century audience. And so with that, that's when I opened the floor up to some of the technologies that we've seen today. Because I had the students, they could either write a traditional essay if that's what they wanted, but they could also submit videos, they could submit, we had a lot of YouTube debates. I had people who created different Facebook pages where you could actually argue with the Pope about whether or not the moon was going on. You could see, who his friends were, and when Galileo gets to be put on the enemy list, dislike this, and they had a really good, some creative arguments. And I'm going to actually hand out this table here. What I'm handing out to you is my assignment. And my assignment unfolded over 3 weeks. They had to make their observations. They had to formulate their argument. And then what they had to do was they had to assess each other. And that's where I used the Blackboard peer assessment tool. And so each student got an anonymous version of their classmates' work. They had to read or watch those submissions, and they had to critique them. So I have my criteria for the critique on the third page there. And we used those, they had to score them, and the top 3 winners did an in-class debate. And so in-class debate, continuing on the hypothesis of whether or not the moon is hollow. And in class, we did a live in-class debate with a Twitter feed. So they could sit in class, Twitter or tweet their questions, and the people on stage had to actually, debate and answer the questions. What I found, kind of surprisingly, that last part, that Twitter part, failed miserably. Oh my God, they hated that. It was awful. I ended up standing there just pointing to people and I'm like, okay, what's your question? Twitter did not work at all. And what I've given you is also the sort of the raw results of the surveys, as well as the comments that the students have pulled out. And hands down, they loved the Galileoscope part of it. They really loved struggling with the technology and seeing what it was. Their answers to the questions of, did this make you better understand the challenges that Galileo faced? Absolutely. Yes, that is what they did. Did they like working with Blackboard? No. They did not like that at all. They thought that was sort of an overkill. They thought that it was buggy. They were frustrated with it. But they did like the old type of technology. It gave them a lot of room to work with that.
My name is Debbie Sturm. I'm a clinical assistant professor in my 3rd year in the College of Ed in counselor education. And I'm going last because I sort of had a complete hodgepodge approach to this. I was basically walking in going, I'm going to try anything and everything and throw it all together and see what happens. We are in the process, we just began a brand new minor in counseling, attracting undergraduates, kind of in response to this idea of it's time to expand, generate revenue, increase class sizes, and do all of that. And I'm the coordinator of the minor. And we have not traditionally worked with undergraduates. We have graduate students and doctoral students. That's about it. Our program is relatively small, and then we take a cohort of about 30 every year. They work their way through a class sequence. The largest class size we would ever have is 30. Most of the time we have 20 or less. And so as we were opening the doors for this minor, we knew on sort of a general marketing formula, if we got a 2% return on the people who would be likely to show up for the minor, we would have 80 students in our first year and probably as many as 400 by our second or third year. And so, just to share, I counted my numbers this weekend because I said 80, I get 150, and I have 150 on the dot this first year. But with that comes a whole change, a big shift for us in that now we're increasing class sizes, we're changing the type of student that we're working with and the whole purpose of them being there. And we're also having to move towards a more online format and training our doctoral students to really serve in all those areas. So I walked in thinking, well, I got to start somewhere with figuring out how we're going to do this. This is really foreign territory. Counselors don't do technology stuff. I'll do anything, and so that's why I was I'll jump in and just try anything. And then the course that I targeted was our Intro to Counseling class. Our new cohort starts that in the summer, which is when this grant started. So I was teaching it in the summer, I was teaching it in the fall, hoping to kind of get a hybrid version, and then by the spring I'm teaching it again, and it's strictly online. So it's been a transition. What I did, and again, my dad was like, I'll do anything, which was the nice part of being kind of part of this grant team, because I heard all sorts of perspectives and things that other people were doing. So I kind of started to draw from that and experiment. Last summer, our class met in the TV studio and recorded every single class session. So then I had an automatic bank of live sessions of every course, every guest speaker. I used Skype to bring in our textbook author, who's just awesome, and we recorded an interview with him in the class. And so we've got this whole bank of videos from every topic and every guest speaker and everything. So that's sort of where I started basing things around. And then I just went crazy. Started adding everything. When I started the class in the fall, which is our first offering for strictly undergraduates, I had about 28 students in the class, and I met with them on the first day and said, here's what we're doing. So the first time we're offering this, I'm trying things, I need your feedback. I really need y'all engaged in this process to tell me what's working for you and what's not. And you'll find that we're going to do a lot of different things, and you're forming the minor. So right from the get-go, it was important to get the students bought in that I could totally bomb on something here, I could try something and they'll hate it, or we could find out together that some things work really well. So we had an ongoing conversation, which was kind of cool when I got the survey results at the end, because the results reflected them valuing the conversation about, is this working and is it not? And so there was very little criticism. There was more next time you do this, think about, which was really nice, because that told me that they realized they were part of the formative process. And I mean, that's one thing I think I took away from it, was if I'm going to try everything in the world, I'm going to get the students engaged in forming this. As we went on, I tried, again, a lot of things. We used the TV studio, which is fantastic. I mean, they're incredibly supportive and wonderful. You learn a lot of really interesting things, like one of my doc students worked with me, and she was pregnant at the time, and she kind of grew over the course of the class, and we were thinking about ways how do you hide your belly? And, but, not talking about, oh, what a beautiful day today, or did y'all see the news last night? And it made me a stronger teacher, because I was able to stay a lot more focused, and I can get there random and talk, and the students were really kind of into it, because they loved, okay, it's time. And it was just kind of cool. And just working in that process was really interesting, and the collaboration with Distance Ed over making sure that launched properly in the fall was great. And then we played with discussion boards, which I do in most classes, but really ways that discussion boards worked for them, whether it was breaking them into groups and letting them get deeper into it, or whether it was keeping it larger. So it's a constant conversation. We introduced a blog because they wanted to be able to talk to each other more about the class, but not so much with a prescribed topic. So every week there was a link to a blog where they could just kind of talk about the class. And that came about 6 or 7 weeks in, when they started saying, well, we want to be able to talk to each other, but we don't want to come to class. All right. So, and this semester I introduced wikis, and they're really excited about that. And then I've introduced iTunes U this semester. And for some reason, at one point in the fall, I just added this welcome video for an activity they were doing. I just took a flip video. I was like, hey, everybody, welcome, and here's what you're going to do today. And they went crazy over it because they thought that they felt connected. So this semester, every week, I've been walking around my house with a flip video, and it's crazy. And I'll put it in the kitchen, and I'll go, welcome to week 3, la 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 la, and then I take it and I like change my shirt, go into the dining room, stick it up. Wait, welcome to week 4. I created all these videos walking around my house with like different views and different shirts. And so, but for some reason they really liked that they had a 2-minute like welcome to the week, like that personal connection, and then they had that personal connection with their peers. And in the counseling program, that's the thing that we were most nervous about as we started to go online was we not only do we need that personal connection because it's counseling, but we also are ethically responsible for the quality of the students that we put forth. It's not as big an issue with undergrads, but we have an ethical, thing, gatekeeping role, and so we have to be aware of stuff that's happening. So this whole idea of even selling technology and what we do is, how can I still know my students? How can they still feel like I know them so that they can really talk about some of the stuff that we present? So that little welcome video and the blog has been crazy as far as their perception of connectedness to me and to each other. And so it's really opened up discussions that I didn't know could happen, and I'm relieved to see can, because we really need them to be able to happen. And we're moving into iTunes U right now, which is got its little glitches of its own, but it's definitely because some of us don't read instructions very well. And so, it's nice that we've got just like amazing resources, because Mitchell West came over and he talked to me and to my doc students who teach some of the classes and just said, here's what you do, and showed us, because some of us need to be shown and we can't follow instructions, and yet the instructions still exist too, and those resources to share with the students. And I also did a lot with narrative PowerPoints through Adobe Connect and the iClickers for exam review. So I went in and basically and then I'm writing down extra normal and pull everywhere. Because being part of this team just exposed me to all sorts of different things that I went in and just tried. And I think if there's one thing that the takeaway is, like, just try. Engage your students in that process and say, today we're going to experiment with something, I want to know what y'all think about it. And if you like it, let's talk about ways that we can incorporate it to improve your learning. And just having that relationship with the students in the process is better for them, it's better for your outcomes, and it's better for how to figure out what works for your class. I also supervise our doctoral students teaching some of our classes. And so I had to make sure that whatever I was learning, I was then able to pass on to them so that they could use it. There isn't a job in counselor that's posted right now that doesn't say experience with technology required. And so I also realized that in learning this myself, I needed to be able to pass it on to my doc students so that they could use it in their teaching and become stronger when they hit the market. So it's about doing it myself, but then also passing it on. As they become more proficient, our program just becomes more proficient. And I also learned that we just have amazing support. We have amazing support technologically within the College of Ed, and we have amazing support like university-wide, and there's nobody who refuses to answer a question and refuses to show up or refuses to help. And when I was getting ready to try something in a class, I would go to the folks in our tech support in College of Ed and say, I'm doing something tonight that might bomb. Is somebody going to be around here that need to like call for help? And so there was just like that communication of, we're trying something, not sure how it's going to work. Can you be around if I scream? Come rescue me. So there's great support, and there's great resources, and then I think just my final thing is just experiment. Because there's so many awesomely cool things that we can do, and I'm obsessed with flip videos right now, and I think there's just so many things that are actually really easy, and they're here for us to try, and talk to your students about what works and